Getting set for your interview. Interviews were conducted face to face before the COVID-19 pandemic, and depending on your professional body, would have an interview facilitator, two assessors, and the candidate. Now, like I said, this setup will vary depending on your professional body, and you're advised to check with your professional body for the arrangements in place. For interviews that are conducted online, it's important that you get a good quality handset and microphone to ensure that there is clear communication between yourself and the interview panel. So the last thing you want is for the panelists to have issues with hearing you clearly. It's important for you to dress smartly, even if the interview is conducted over Microsoft Teams. And of course, you should be aware that the chartered engineer interview is a professional business meeting, so it's important for you to look good. And now, this point is very important. It's important that you've got a drink at hand so you do not dry up during the interview. So remember that you will be doing most of the talking, and do not hesitate to take a sip if you need to during the interview, especially if it's not your turn to speak. You can use that opportunity to drink some water. It's important that you ensure that your background lighting is good so that both sides of your face can be seen clearly by the panel. So feel free to experiment and test the equipment, all the lighting that you have got in place beforehand. Make sure that you also switch off all your phones and anything that could interrupt you during your interview, because you do not want to be interrupted and lose your concentration during the interview. Ensure that there is no background noise, and make sure that your internet connection is reliable, and ensure you have it tested before the interview. We'll get straight to some interview tips. Now, an application form that has been carefully prepared will almost certainly result in a smoother interview, as the assessors will have a very good understanding of what exactly you have done. So it's actually going to make the interview flow smoothly. It's important that you revise your chartered engineer application form and have at least a couple of mock interviews before the interview. One good thing you can do is to include someone who is not in your profession, and then make them ask as many questions as possible. You have to concentrate on your most recent projects. Focus on projects for which you had lead responsibilities. If you're quoting examples of when you were working as a graduate, that is not going to be helpful. So put in your most recent projects. During the interview, you are not obliged to divulge sensitive information. So, for instance, if you work in defense, or if you are involved with very commercially sensitive information, you're not obliged to divulge them. Be prepared to answer questions about your most challenging or your most interesting projects, and also what was most rewarding about your project. Be prepared to answer questions about your biggest challenges and questions about projects that you felt did not go so well and why you felt that was so. Also, you should give clear and logical and succinct answers. Do not ramble on, go straight to the point. Do not rush your answers. Take your time, relax, so there's plenty of time. If you're limited to 15 minutes, for instance, 15 minutes is enough time for you to talk about your projects. So you've got enough time. Now, also, what you have done is more important than the job titles you have. So do not waste so much time talking about the titles. Just go straight and talk about what you did. Now, it is possible that members of the panel are from a completely different industry as yourself. So this is not a problem at all because the test is all about how well you can demonstrate that you have complied to the UK spec competence. So you shouldn't have any issue whatsoever. It's important for you to respect the time. So if you're asked to speak for 15 minutes, for instance, you should speak within the time limit that you have been given. Have a very good idea for what you plan to do after you become chartered. So this is part of your development action plan. So a very good example would be if you plan to have a greater involvement within the IET community, if you want to volunteer more, or if you want to become an IET mentor. Now, this point is very important. You should have prepared beforehand a checklist of things that you would like to cover, and you should feel very free to refer to them when you are asked during the interview if you've got questions. So it's very, very good. And also, when you are asked at the very end if you have got a question, it's advisable for you to have at least a couple of very good, intelligent, well thought out questions for the interview panel. Do not hesitate to provide further information if you feel recent changes to your professional situation can support your application. So, for instance, if you have been promoted recently or you have acquired a new certification or attended or delivered um, information during a conference, you shouldn't hesitate to let the panel know about that. And finally, you should be ready to produce an up-to-date and detailed copy of your development action plan if you are asked to do so by the panel. Now, if your DAP has changed since you submitted your CEng application, you should notify the panel. And if the interview is conducted online, so over Microsoft Teams, for instance, you should ensure that you can easily share that information with the panel. So your IT dexterity will be put to the test. So it's important that you familiarize yourself with whatever online facility is used for the interview if it's not face to face. So that's about the tips. We'll look at some of the competences you should some things about the competence you should take into account during the interview. So for competences A and B, that is like that's where all the technical bits are. So you mustn't underestimate any competence. Do not assume that it is okay to do well under competences A and B and perform poorly under competence E, for instance. So the assessors will want more information about what you have stated in your report. So under these two competencies. So for instance, you will be asked to elaborate on the if you did a feasibility report or if you carried out a research, you'll be asked to talk more about them. And also, for instance, if you had to convince team members, project members about a plan, you would be asked to provide more information on that. For competence C, you shouldn't worry too much if you do not have any line management responsibility. So you'll be fine as long as you can provide evidence of effective management of resources. It might be budget, it might be contractors, staff, project graduates, apprentices, etc. So yeah, you'll be fine. For competence D, you will be tested anyway during the interview. So are you able to speak clearly, logically? Do people understand what you are saying? You've produced your IET report. How easy was it for the assessors to extract the relevant information? So these will be pointers as to whether or not you're someone that can produce reports that are easy to understand. For competence E during the interview, you'll be required to demonstrate that you have got a clear understanding of the code of conduct and ethics of your professional body, and you should be able to link it with the code of conduct of your company. So, for instance, after comparing the code of conduct of your company and the IET or the IMEC-E code of conduct, how similar are they? So would you say both of them are similar to, say, 90%? So that's a very good example. If you're asked about health and safety at work, do not mention things that you would do anyway as part of your job. So, for instance, first aider training is mandatory for certain roles, and then wearing PPE is required for certain jobs as well. So, instead, what you should say when you're asked about health and safety are things like risks assessment that you have um, completed, how you have incorporated safety in your system design. And then, for instance, if you work in the operations department, are you responsible for signing permits to work? So these are some of the safety things you should consider. If you're asked about sustainability, do not mention things like sorting waste and the likes, because you are required to do that anyway. So you should rather talk about how you managed energy efficiently, how you demonstrated financial sustainability, basically all the things you did to reduce waste. Things like even the planet, so things like doing an environmental impact assessment to ensure that you are not polluting the environment. Those are very good examples of sustainability. If you were asked about your commitment to the profession, you should talk about how you have supported the development of young engineers, or how you have encouraged young people to study engineering. Before attending the interview, it's a good idea to have a proof of involvement with your professional body. So, for instance, you must have attended workshops and other events that have been organized by your professional body. Okay, so we would look at a sample presentation. This one is for the IET, and so this candidate, Sarah, is presenting her work using the UK spec as a guide, and she's expected to present everything under 15 minutes. Okay, so she's got an overview page, and it says, using the projects below as examples, I will highlight how I demonstrated the UK spec competences. So project 1, chiller replacement. I was responsible for the design and testing of a £1 million replacement chiller unit at the research laboratory, and you state the place. Now, what was the engineering challenge? So the existing cooling system was inefficient and unreliable. A replacement chiller was required to be installed and commissioned and fully operational during a 6-week summer shutdown period. And what was the result? The result was that an efficient and reliable chiller unit was installed ahead of program, within budget, with zero accidents or injuries, and to excellent quality. So the key words have been highlighted in red. So what that means is this. Already just from this page. So by the way, if it's a 15 minutes presentation, you're expected to spend roughly 2 minutes and 30 seconds on each slide. Now for this slide, what this candidate has done is that she has given the interview panel basically everything they need in a summarized version. So basically she's used 2 projects. Now, two projects is more than enough for you to use as examples. So remember, for the interview, it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality of the information you are presenting. So two projects is more than enough. In fact, you could even do it with one, as long as you've got very, very strong proof of complying with the UK spec. So for this example, this is the first page. She's listed two projects and she's talked about inefficiency for the old system. So everybody knows that in her design, she's expected to come up with something which is efficient and reliable. So that's under the A and the B competence. Now, she also had the constraint of time. And if you look at the results, this project was delivered ahead of program. So that's C competence. She worked with budget. So that's C competence again. Zero accidents or injuries. So she actually put in place systems to ensure that no one was injured during the project. So that's an E competence. And then quality. Now, for each of these terms, she must be in a position to explain exactly what she means. So, for instance, if she says efficiency, so how exactly were you able to determine that the system was efficient? Did you carry out tests? Or what were the results? Reliable, what reliability values were you working towards? So, things like that. So, the candidate should be in a position to explain them. So the second project is similar in terms of mentioning the keywords. So it's a data login and a data login system replacement. And the challenge was to install a system because the existing system was slow and unsustainable. So here we're talking about sustainability. So that's under competence E. So the candidate had to design a system that would solve the problem of a waste in a particular resource. There was also significant downtime, and obviously in a power plant, if the power plant is not producing, it means money is being lost. So so clearly you can see competence E very strong in this example. So this is just the overview page in which the candidate shouldn't spend more than 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Now, this is project one. So the candidate is talking about what exactly she did, and she's to spend 3 minutes on this slide. So there are pictures of the actual chiller. So that's the system that was, this is the replacement system. To the left and to the right, you've got a schematic. Okay, so one thing you must bear in mind is that during the interview, you should be in a position to share necessary documents. So the panel might feel that you need to zoom in on one of the components. So you should be able to switch from the presentation to, say, a PDF or a picture file on your system, and it basically projects that file to the panel. Now, each of the bullet points should be easily linkable to the UK spec. So for the first one is carrying out specification of the chiller replacement according to company standards on modifications and replacement, which is based on British standard. So you can state the specific British standard and so yeah, so that's competence A and B. And then as the lead reviewer of the project, I technically reviewed the detailed design documents. So things like the system diagram, power supply diagram, schematic diagrams. So all that is on the competence A and B. That's the technical bit. So that's the next slide. So again, 3 minutes maximum, or roughly 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So I led a multidisciplinary team of project stakeholders and carried out regular program reviews with the stakeholders to monitor progress and agree key deliverables, dates, and milestones. So this is competence C. So what that means is that the panel is rest assured that the candidate has actually cited examples on basically all the competence. That's the idea. Now, when you're preparing for your interview, if you have a presentation to deliver, one good thing you could do is to, at the end of each bullet point, you can state what competence that is. So, for instance, the first one, leading a team of stakeholders, you could put competency in bracket. This is just a guide, but probably you take them off during the interview. So chairing meetings is also that's a competence D. Risk logs would go under competence C, and then representing the design team during meetings, so that's competence D. Quality assurance, so everything having to do with helping with the project plan, project management, that will be competence C. And also during that time, you'll be expected to communicate effectively. So that will be a combination of C and D. And then carrying out analysis of contract variations. So that will be competence C as well. And also tracking the status of progress. So that will be competence C as well. So you can see that this candidate had very heavy involvement with competence C. Carrying out environmental impact assessments on the refrigerants to basically make sure that that refrigerant is not contributing to a greenhouse gas emission. So that's competence E. And then the last one, she complied with ethical principles while carrying out her job. So that's competence E. So you can see that all the different competences are well represented, and the candidate should be in a position to provide detailed responses when called upon to do so. So that's the next project, so which is on a data logging and replacement. So very similar with the first one. You've got a picture to the left and then a schematic. The candidate carried out extensive research in order to take her knowledge and understanding to the next level. This enabled her to come up with establishing serial data communication between the control system and the data logging system using MATLAB. So doing that research comes under competence A. And then the data logging system was quite difficult to come up with, because there were issues with not being able to carry out tests when the power plant is live. So she had to devise a solution by carrying out simulation of the plant parameters using MATLAB. So that will be under competence A and B. Carrying out validation of the logic using tests. So carrying out tests, so that's competence B as well. And then planning, so that's competence C. Carrying out tests, that will be competence B. Progress meetings, that's competence D. And then she chipped in something right at the end. So this is not necessarily directly related to the project, but it's just letting the panelists know that in her company, she is actually one of the contact persons for the IET. So she delivers information on how to use the IET career management facility. So this helps candidates with preparing their reports, with tracking their competencies, and also helps them to produce their development action plans and the likes. So this is a very, very good example of a candidate that is committed to the to her professional body. So the candidate is expected to spend roughly 15 minutes, and there will be a question and answer session at the very end. So that's just a very quick one on what you expected to do during the interview. It's going to be very, very fine. You are not going to be asked things outside of what you have done and what you have reported in your reports. So you thank the panel right at the end of the interview. So thank you very much for taking time to listen. I do wish you the very best in your interview, and I wish you the very best in your career. So see you again, and bye bye.